Hello there. I hope everyone's doing well. I'm just enjoying a delicious coffee from Ryan's Roaster in Korea. My friend just came back from Korea and he brought me this Red Mountain to Kenyan. I don't think I did a particularly good job brewing it because it's in this little sachet. Anyway, I hope you're enjoying something that makes you happy while you're watching this, whatever that may be. You know, it's the little things that get us through the day. So I want to talk about two books. One is newer, and another one is a couple years old at this point. The first book, the older book, it's called Rejoice: A Knife Through the Heart by Steven Erikson. If you're a fantasy fan, you've definitely heard of this author. He is a really prolific fantasy author. He wrote Malzahn, Book of the Fallen, and most of the books are on that. So he's much more known for his fantasy than his sci-fi. In fact, I think this might be his first sci-fi speculative fiction book. And so this book was published in October 3rd of 2019, and it takes place during around 2018, and a slightly different version of our current one, which I think is mostly because Erikson didn't want to get sued because he has political leaders involved in this. And it takes place in this alternate 2018 where aliens make first contact. And so it's during a Trump administration, but the Trump is called Reign, and there's an analog for Canada's PM, and she's kind of the voice of reason between the two of them. And since Erikson's Canadian, I'm not really surprised that he has such a profound respect for Canadian authors, especially the sci-fi authors. He actively calls them out, and one of them, Robert Sawyer, actually had a blurb on the front of the book. And he's in the book, which is kind of, I'm sure, nice for him. The other book is called The Myth of American Idealism by Noam Chomsky and Nathan Robinson. It came out October 15th of 2024. I think this book is pretty topical considering everything that's happening with Israel and Gaza, and you know what we're seeing in Ukraine, especially right now that Trump is back being president, because this was obviously published before the election, and the portion written about Gaza was written before the October 10th of 2023, October 7th of 2023 attack. So there's like a postscript that kind of deals with that. What you can kind of think of the book as a rebuttal to Reagan's United States is the shining city of the hill, and that our actual foreign policy doesn't align with our idealism of us being that shining city on the hill, especially considering the amount of interventions that our government, the U.S. government, has enacted in our sphere of influence. So and this book answered a question that I've had since I was younger, and I think as I've grown older, I've come to understand this somewhat implicitly by going out and trying to understand this. But a question I always wondered was, why are all these countries that are in the U.S. sphere of influence kind of like having a rough go of things? They are politically unstable, there's high crime, there's drugs, and what the Myth of American Idealism points out is, starting even before Reagan, but of course Reagan was heavily involved, but we just deposed leaders in a number of these countries like Nicaragua, Guatemala, Chile, And then we backed dictators. So I didn't really realize, but Chomsky pointed out that we backed Pinochet, which, if you're not aware of who Pinochet is, he murdered hundreds of thousands of Chilean citizens and people who were political opponents of his regime, and some of the intelligentsia were just wiped out. So, and with Nicaragua, that was part of the Iran-Contra, which, you know, the Contra were these paramilitary forces or rebels that were fighting in Nicaragua, and we used money from an Iran deal to fund them. And whenever we were officially not on good terms with Iran, and in fact, during Carter's presidency, Reagan had a backdoor deal with Iran to withhold hostages to help him get elected. We've got a lot of blood on our hands in the Western Hemisphere, and we need to account for that. We need to be respectful of that, especially since we're seeing such intense migratory pressure from this, you know, the global South and our Western Hemisphere, where they're all trying to come to the U.S. And I think it's our moral responsibility to take care of them, considering that anytime a leftist president or or someone who was out for their people's interest over the United States interest, they were often removed from power. At least that's what, according to Chomsky. So now what does this have to do with Rejoice, A Knife Through the Heart? I think that this book takes place in a very fascinating part of what I would consider like the transition periods of science fiction. I think most of us have seen and watched Star Trek, and how it's a post-scarcity world where you can just walk up to a replicator and say, you know, Earl Grey hot, and you'll get a steaming mug of hot Earl Grey, or, you know, Red Mountain Kenyan. And so it's a post-scarcity society, and Star Trek doesn't really directly deal with this all the time. They kind of skip over portions of it. So they talk about the things that ultimately led to some of these changes that enabled becoming this post-scarcity society. You know, the Bell riots in DS9 are a big example of that, which were supposed to have taken place last year, which were really more of an analogy of the Rodney King riots anyway. And then there was First Contact, Star Trek First Contact, which there was this kind of ragtag group of scientists that created a warp drive, which is what drove the Vulcans to come and communicate with us. And in the Culture, Ian M. Banks series, he doesn't really talk about it at all. It's just set way in the future, and it's a post-scarcity world, and most of the humans that are involved, they are living lives of luxury, and the people who have this itch for investigating or adventure that is outside the normal scope of what the society accepts, they're put into like the diplomatic corps to go talk to new alien species to try and bring them into the culture, to tip regime change towards joining the culture. They don't do it in as bloody of a way usually. But there are definitely cases where that happens, like in use of weapons. Clearly an example where the culture engaged in regime change, and they were punished for it later on, and it came back to haunt them in some ways. The argument that is made is in this the goal of this alien intervention that comes to Earth is to actually protect the planet, to protect life on the planet generally, not specifically human life. And the ship that has come to the Earth is there to make a decision about intervening and allowing humanity to survive. And they pick a sci-fi author named, I can't remember her first name. Her last name is August. And she is a very outspoken woman who has a solid understanding of what's going on politically in the world, and her books are well read by aliens around the universe. She actually name drops Banks here specifically because she feels that he would have been a better person to talk to, but Banks was already dead in real life, so he wouldn't have been able to talk. The ship that came doesn't have any aliens on it. It only has an AI. And the AI is there to make this determination. The AI is incredibly powerful, and I think it is modeled somewhat after the AI in the culture, and which is clearly a difference between the level of artificial intelligence in Star Trek, which Star Trek has a lot of warning shows around AI between prosthetic humans or synthetic humans rather, and things like Control, which was an enemy in Discovery. They have a lot of cautionary tales, and of course so does Dune. Dune has a lot of cautionary tales about AI, but the culture doesn't. They created these powerful AIs that are called minds that are many human, like the power of many humans together. And so the AI is there to make these decisions and to engage with protecting us from ourselves. And August learns that the actual aliens are off doing something more important than dealing with his backwater country called Earth, or backwater world called Earth. And so we are just important enough for this AI, and this AI dramatically intervenes with humanity. In a way, this sort of interaction with these aliens being busy doing things elsewhere kind of feels like what we do with like the United States does with animals and protecting developing countries, like with USAID and Environmental Protection Agency. They are severely underfunded, and even USAID is used as soft power to support U.S. State Department and U.S. hegemony in general. So the AI is able to use something, some sort of made-up science, but it's based off of using the Earth's magnetic field to create a real-time response system to respond everywhere in the U.S. or everywhere in the world. So the AI uses Earth magnetic fields to interact with humanity. I think basically because magnetic fields are everywhere, that Erickson decided that it was a reasonable mechanism to interact. And with magnetics, there's a lot of energy that's created through that. And of course, with solar energy interacting with the Earth magnetosphere, you could easily make an argument that power is generated, and you can use this power to do a lot of things. And it seems reasonable, even if the technology is very outlandish in some ways. So this AI is able to control and intervene directly in any human-on-human violence in real time. There's a plethora of examples of this that all kind of happen simultaneously. They're told in serial because that's how stories have to be told, but you can get the idea that everything is happening at the same time, from an abusive husband and a wife finally deciding to defend herself, a warlord in Africa who is in a fight with one of his own soldiers, a woman named Ruth who's in the IDF who's at the border with Palestine when they're in the middle of a conflict, and there's also a weapons salesman named Casper, and so all these characters are prevented from doing their violence anymore. Casper is stopped because his guns don't work anymore. I mean, they still fire, but they don't hurt anybody. So what's the point of buying a gun if you can't kill people? Of course, in the IDF, they can't harm Palestinians anymore, and Palestinians can't harm the IDF anymore. So there's kind of no way to stop people from moving. You can't commit violence to stop people from crossing borders, which actually impacts the United States, because we can't stop anybody crossing the U.S. border from the global south. There's also a lot of limitations on what kind of fishing and harm we can do to animals. So it's even more encompassing than just humans hurting each other. And I think the edge of sentience is actually an interesting kind of another corollary with this book, because in the edge of sentience, they created this framework called the precautionary principle, where you want to act within commensurate harm balanced with the benefit. Like, you can't just stop all fishing, because the harm of stopping fishing is worse than all, like, you could have entire populations of humans go hungry and starve to death, and that wouldn't outweigh the benefit to the fish being alive, because it's presumed that we have a right to exist as much as the fish do. So instead, the fishers are required to use hooks and do things take a smaller impact, rather than fishing out entire areas of the sea. So once the violence is eliminated, it kind of follows these different people: President Rain, the Canadian PM, the wife, the warlord, and I think that the sci-fi author is something of a stand-in for Erikson. And the interesting thing is, each one of these becomes a study of how people can respond to being safe, both the abuser and the abused person. So with the abused wife, with her suddenly safe, she feels that she can do things that she wasn't able to do before. She could go and take care of herself. She didn't have to feel chained to making her husband's dinner. Her husband also was forced to reckon with everything that he did to her. The AI was able to manipulate people's brain chemistry some, and forced him to really see the harm that he did, not just to the wife, but to the daughter, who there may have been some other abuse going on there that the wife was worried about. So there's just kind of a full reckoning between these, at the small scale, between families like this. And then with the warlord, I think there's a broader critique that you could really argue that's being done here, where the warlord is prevented from doing harm to his own people, to like pillaging, raiding, and kidnapping children, and he has a girl that he is involved with in like a child that we're talking about here, in ways that are abhorrent, and he is changed in a way that he is unable to be aroused. The girl is mentally protected so that she can heal from her traumas. The warlord has to confront what horrors he did. He has to grow and recognize that he was wounded, and as a hurt person, he hurt people. And one of the ways that Erickson really skewers modern developed countries is that the alien provides goods for every country, for everybody. Goods appear very much like out of a replicator. Food, medicine. Some people get nanobots that just cure diseases that are already cured in the Western world. Diseases that countries like the United States are intentionally metering out how many cures we're providing, especially now under the Trump administration, where we're just killing support for HIV medications. And it really points out that, yes, the U.S. could provide anything and everything to these countries to help get them to parity with where we are. We could provide food. We could provide building materials so that these communities aren't built off of, scrap metal or asbestos or whatever. And so it really is saying, look, the Western world could do this right now, and they are making a choice not to. Instead, the Western world is intervening in a way that it escalates violence, that escalates like damage between people to exploit the world. And it's something that we should really take a look at and reckon with. Why are we doing these things? And I think that's where the myth of American idealism comes in as well, because it's like we could be doing these things. The ideal of what American politicians say that we're doing out in the world is this very thing that this AI is doing, but we're really not doing it. We are enabling Casper to sell arms to ISIS. We are enabling this Coco, the warlord, to slaughter his own people, to have blood diamond mines and blood metal materials that his people are enslaved in. And it takes a little while for some of the leaders to recognize what's happening. So, and it's the Canadian PM that recognizes this first. And she recognizes, talking to her cabinet, that yes, we could have done all this, and we failed to do so. And I would argue that because of the way the aliens interact with all these countries, there is a direct punishment to the U.S. because the U.S. is not given the same benefits as every other country. The U.S. is expected to fend for itself, to build new spaceports. Every other country or groups of countries are getting large spaceports, and the U.S. is expected to do all of these on their own. And it has the resources to keep up with the rest of the world that is being brought up to the same level as the U.S. And yeah, I mean, I really do think that the United States could allow for the self-actualization of any country and any group of people, and that we should be doing it. We have the resources. Instead, we're letting the world fight. We're destabilizing the world. We're threatening Canada to become the 51st state. We're threatening Ukraine to take all their resources for continued safety. We are very much enabling ethnic cleansing and dictatorships throughout the world, instead of being that golden city on the hill that is providing for our people and showing the way forward for the rest of the world. I think one of the interesting critiques in this book is also the critique of Israel. I was originally conflicted about Ruth in this book because it wasn't immediately obvious to me which side of the line between abuser and abused Erickson was putting Ruth in the IDF. And I think that ultimately he put Ruth on the side of the abuser. And I think that because what ends up happening is the IDF just dissolves. They just realize there's nothing to fight for. They can't control this border. There's nothing that they can do. They don't have a reason to fight. So they leave the border. And Ruth goes to this little cafe at some point, and a Palestinian young man who she thinks is very young, but realizes is about the same age she is, which if anything tells you that she's too young to be fighting a war. She looks at this man who finds her attractive and blushes whenever he sees her, and especially because she gave him a little smile. She realizes that she would have hated him before, and that she would have scoffed at this man's attention and would have been disgusted by it. So I think that even though he's not as critical as the wife abuser, he still is definitely criticizing and saying that Israel is on the abuser side, on the domineering side, and that Ruth is alone at the end, and it is ultimately this young Palestinian man who reaches forward to say, look, yes, we have differences, and decides to be with her so that she doesn't have to be all alone. I'm a little conflicted about that, but I think the message is good. But I still think that, yeah, there's some questionable who's really the abuser there in Erikson. So I think that this book could be considered a prequel to The Culture, like I kind of mentioned. They actually make fun of the Star Trek Prime Directive, which is not interfering with alien planets, to let things happen as they happen. Which Star Trek itself has a huge issue, which they always interact with them. And I think it kind of, Erikson balances the line between what humanity's violence and knowing that we're not ever going to be a pacifist world, that we would eventually try to rebel against some of these changes. And the AI and these other aliens know that. And Erikson brings up the Greys, the Roswell aliens, and they've been preying on humanity for the past 100 or so years, and they actually have a base on the moon, and Chinese send a mission up to the moon and rescue a whole bunch of humans who are being tortured. With the world finding out that the Greys existed because the AI refuses to allow secrets to continue existing, humanity finds a joint enemy between, instead of wanting to fight each other, they're unified in wanting to fight the Greys. And you learn from August talking with this AI that the primary 3 alien races, there are species that are part of this alien conglomerate, I guess you could say, they're pacifists and they're not very good at fighting, but they can, if they have to. They would rather not. So they want humanity to be the enforcers, to protect other species that are being preyed on. And we learn that there are other aliens being preyed on by the Greys and by other more violent species. And so it kind of becomes yes, we recognize that humanity is violent, and once you leave Earth, you could be violent with each other again. So we need to have an outlet for that, and the aliens provide that for humanity and provide that common mechanism and unifying approach, which I do think that humanity does a good job when we are unified towards stopping something, and when we have cooler heads guiding people towards those things, and respect for those sorts of leaders. So I think, I didn't really talk about the way that idealism talks about Palestine and Israel. And I think the way that Chomsky discusses that is that he argues, similar to Ta-Nehisi Coates, that it is a rather straightforward conflict, in that there's a dominator and a dominated, and that the U.S. could stop the fighting in Palestine whenever we wanted to. And in fact, Citations Needed has been arguing that. And I think that, again, this is the sort of thing that the U.S. could do to stop the ethnic cleansing of the Gaza Strip, the ethnic cleansing that's just starting now on the West Bank. And instead, we in Rejoice, we're basically abdicating that responsibility and leaving it for an AI or alien to do instead. And I think that we really should be pushing our leaders to do better. We should be urging them to stop these genocides, because it doesn't benefit us as Americans. It benefits some U.S. organization that is apart and different than the American people. And I actually kind of experienced that whenever I lived in the Netherlands. I lived with 7 other people. I lived with two guys from Colombia, 2 guys from Pakistan, an Iranian guy, a Turkish guy, and a Chinese woman. And the Iranian guy was terrified of me. He thought I was just going to beat the ever-living hell out of him, because he'd only heard horror stories out of America. He was a really nice guy. He was a really, really nice, really sweet guy. The 2 Pakistani guys were pretty quiet, kept to themselves, but it was an eye-opener to talk with them about their experiences, where they didn't like clear skies because of drone strikes, and those drones were Americans. And the Colombians, they grew up hearing horror stories about the United States funding whatever, all those different things going on in Colombia. And I got a real good exposure to people are people, and they're great. It's governments that are not aligned with who their people are. And I want America to be that idealistic city on the hill. I want us to live up to that idealism. I want us to be the type of country that could enact Rejoice's change, this moving to a post-scarcity society. Obviously, we have a lot of work we would need to do to get to that technology where you can just make metal and material and concrete. But I think that if we fund scientific research towards enabling that sort of thing, we could get there sooner than we expect. And I think that reading a sci-fi book like Rejoice allows us to take a critical eye to how we might inflect from where we are to post-scarcity, what the risks are if we don't do it, because you can kind of see the path that we're going on. And I think that Idealism is kind of a book that Erickson would have used to help research his worldview for the book, and it just really hit me in a way I wasn't expecting. I think we really need to consider the direction of where the world is, and the direction that our country and our leaders are taking us, and if it's the right one for the betterment of everybody. So I know this is a a bit of a downer. I'm kind of apparently good at coming up with those downers. But I really appreciate you coming along for this discussion. I hope if you're into sci-fi that you take a look at Rejoice. It's really well written. It's a fascinating phase in science fiction that isn't covered enough. And I think idealism, it provides some interesting context that a lot of Americans really do need to understand the world better in a way that isn't so American-centric. And thank you for watching. So please comment, like, subscribe, ring the bell. If you have any feedback for my setup, the books I'm reading, if you have a recommendation for a pair of books that you think I could discuss, I'd really appreciate that. And if you have any comments or feedback on what I said, if you think it's bullshit, let me know. Thank you very much.